Hello, everyone. How are you this morning? I am glad that you all are here all bushy-eyed and you have your coffee because today we're going to be talking a little bit about philosophy and ethics in tech. So in case you did not know, I apologize. So my talk is Constantly Ignoring, Constantly Deflecting, a case study of pervasive indifference in technology. Awesome. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Jocelyn Harper. I am a senior associate software engineer at Capital One. I'm currently a full stack engineer, and at Cap One, they mean that quite literally. I am all over the place, primarily in the DevOps sector for our pipelines, for all the applications that my team are in charge of, and also mobile development as of 2 months ago. Secondary to this, I'm also the host of Get Cute Podcast, which is just a podcast that I decided to start because I was really tired of cis white dudes talking to me about things in podcasts that I could not relate to. So I decided to start telling these things from my point of view, and I'd like to say I'm kind of funny in it. So if you guys would like to subscribe to that, I'm on all major podcast platforms. So, ethics. We're going to jump right into the fun stuff with an extremely condensed version of ethics and morality and how it all pertains to you and with tech that we have today. Just give me a moment. There we go. Typically, when you hear a conversation about ethics, it's divided into two subjects, personal and business. Personally, and there are others that do agree with me, people that have gone to school for this and have written papers and books about it as well, that these are two entities that cannot be completely separate when it comes to running a business. I would dare to say that whenever we start a company, aside from the idea that we think it's going to make us money, we have already established a code of ethics with ourselves for how we want our business to be conducted. Of course, this is much easier said than done, because as we have witnessed throughout history, the majority of businesses, at some point in time, no matter how small the infraction, have pushed aside their ethics momentarily when it comes to maximizing their profit. Perfect. Sorry, technical difficulties, don't know what's happening. There we go. So, the definition of ethics, I pulled this directly from dictionary.com and wikipedia.org. Ethics are the moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. As far as business ethics are concerned, they're also known as corporate ethics. It's a form of applied ethics or professional ethics that examines ethical principles and moral of ethical problems that arise in business environments. It applies to all aspects of business conduct and is relevant to the conduct of individuals and entire organizations. That's really the long-winded explanation of it, but if any of you have ever worked for a fairly large corporation, to me, I just think of all of the ethics trainings and modules that we have to go through that are essentially telling you not to take money from anybody, not to accept bribes, don't try to bribe anyone, et cetera, et cetera. Most businesses start out well-meaning with the ethics that they set forth. But as more shareholders that do not share the company's initial dream or ethics start to be added, those shareholders start wondering why the company is not maximizing their profit. It's where ethics start to take a backseat to the overall bottom line and when things begin to blur. In an effort to not sound too cynical about business, because I pretty much have the entire time, I will say that a tech company off the top of my head that's had a great public example of taking a stand with business ethics is Apple, more notably their stance against the FBI in 2016. For those of you that are unfamiliar, the FBI argued that in relation to accessing the San Bernardino shooter's phone in 2016, that it would only be in for that one instance, where Apple and Tim Cook put its foot down and refused to help with the decryption and the bypassing of the feature after 10 unsuccessful logins, which involves a data wipe on the phone. Now, regardless of how your personal feelings about Apple as a business or anything aside about the San Bernardino shooter aside, the situation that Apple took was based on their moral ethics. They knew that helping the FBI in that situation would also put Apple in the situation to be able to unlock a phone at any other time, anytime the FBI decided to take a judicial injunction on them. What could stop the FBI from acquiring another federal injunction for Apple to unlock another iPhone? Apple knew that accepting the federal court ruling and unlocking the phone for this one instance could start the ball rolling on what would be controversial government interference in access to our phones. There we go. So one of the best explanations of ethics is by the ethics guy, and yes, this is a moniker that he goes by, named Bruce Weinstein. The principles that he mentions are simplified and condensed from the book The Principles of Biomedical Ethics by Tom L. Beauchamp and James L. Childress. He suggests that the following principles of ethics can be applied to business and personal life. 1, do no harm. 2, make things better. 3, respect others. 4, be fair. And 5, just care. Now, I'm not here to tell you how to apply these principles of ethics to your life because I believe that how you choose to interpret these is entirely personal. We all have our own personal code of ethics that is loosely or rigidly based upon these principles that we use to go through day-to-day life. Luckily for us, depending on what industry you work in, shout out to the heavily regulated financial industry that I happen to be a part of, we're also beholden to the ethics that the companies that we work for impress upon us. Although a lot of their ethics contain legal jargon, it is safe to say that when we strip that away, business ethics are loosely based off of the following principles of ethics as well. Because following business ethics will also keep you in line with the state and federal law, and also turns out it's profitable too. Thanks, it's really cute. Makes me happy when I'm speaking of these things. So, an even simpler explanation is the difference between right and wrong. In the case with Apple versus the FBI, Apple found that it would be wrong for the company to bypass the encryption on the iPhone. Tim Cook and Apple took that stand. Another example, I see a laptop in the audience that I want, right? I see that it has a cool sticker on the back of it, yada, yada, yada. So personally, for me, what is stopping me from taking someone's laptop? So essentially, you could say the owner would stop me, other people in the audience, if you're brave, they would stop me. Or even the fact that it's against the law would stop me. But above everything else, I analyze the situation with this. Is it right or is it wrong regarding my own personal code of ethics? So besides me being caught and apprehended immediately, I wouldn't steal the laptop because I believe that stealing is wrong. Stealing is against my code of ethics because it would not be fair and would cause harm to others, specifically the person that I'm stealing it from. It is also important to note that not every decision is as binary as right or wrong. It depends on how closely tied and how deeply that it affects you. My take on blatant racism won't be the same as someone that doesn't have to deal with racism, which for me is a shame because that's where empathy starts to come into play along with your ethics. I may not be able to identify with your specific situation, but I can still apply my code of ethics the same to figure out where it lies. So, ethics plus success. Small business books will tell us that you will have a successful business if you start out with a strong code of ethics for conduction of business and also for your eventual expansion of employees. And don't get me wrong, there are companies out there that seemingly have the public perception of being good companies. They have a great public image, no notable public hiccups, have a track record of good business dealings that they make with their customers and with their stakeholders at the helm. The thing is that most companies all start out that way, but somewhere along the line, be it the institution of a board or perhaps a CEO switch that we've seen happen many times over, their ethics veer slightly to the left. And sooner than you would think. We have talked about seemingly good business ethics, but let us talk about bad business ethics. Earlier, we talked about my sudden want and need to steal a laptop, but businesses can steal in terms of resources, time, money, materials. They can lie to employees. They can lie to customers and the government about the dealings of their business. They defraud customers and other businesses. They can use their abundance of money to have a heavy hand in political influences locally and nationally. We have all seen this happen, and it's still happening within our lifetime. Aligning with my code of ethics, I personally would not work for or financially support a company that has the public opinion of having poor business ethics. So, for the sake of brevity, we're going to focus on the situational aspect of the morality spectrum because that's where most of you are when it comes to situations that arise with tech companies that happen to work with every single day. Here is the morality shown as a simplified spectrum. I don't know if any of you had to even remember taking like a morality test when you first started going into public school. I realized as I was writing this talk that I remember taking that when I was like 4, almost 5 to get into kindergarten. Essentially, they just sit you in a room with a psychologist or psychiatrist, and they administer a test with toys, with colors and things to try to figure out where you lie on the morality spectrum. And depending on where you lie, you would get shifted to different classes. Now, I won't be diving into children's philosophy because A, I'm not qualified to do that, and there's a whole lot of moral prisms that go just beyond the sake of this spectrum here, but it's beyond the scope of this talk and the scope of me, but so the centralized morality spectrum is enough. So, as denoted by my cute ghosts, moralistic is good, virtuous, upstanding. I would say being moralistic all of the time would make you chaotic good. At the opposing end, there's immoral, bad, chaotic evil, and then there's everything between, situational, because sometimes ethic is not black and white, it's not binary. Sometimes there are deciding factors in how you will react and how you will deem some moral or amoral, or perhaps be completely indifferent. I urge you not to be indifferent. As I said before, we're going to be talking about situational. Okay, and now this is cute for me. So let's take a moment to think of technology as a whole as a house. And I know that probably like an apartment building or something would be better apt, but I couldn't find a really spooky apartment building, and it wasn't nearly as cute as this image, so you guys will just have to work with me on that. So it's a pretty old house, many great people, mostly white men, but many great people have contributed to the architecture that is the house of tech. Within this house, there are many rooms. Each room is dedicated to further advancing our society, for better or for worse, but seemingly for the better. That is until we get inside of the closets of these rooms. As we know, every closet has their skeletons. But how many skeletons are we allowed to accept before we just start asking, are we supposed to be just okay with this? So, where do you stand? It's a loaded question, but it is no longer the time to tiptoe around the issue. It's not that these issues within our industry are becoming more prevalent, it's just easier for us to talk about it now. So, say what you would like about social media platforms like Twitter. It has become a great network for people that may have not been given a second glance when voicing concerns about issues in our industry. Like any open forum, there are concerns about echo chambers, but with certain topics like overt racism and discrimination, those are the type of echo chambers that I'm okay with. I have seen more people band together against unjust situations in our industry with direct change as a result on Twitter that I can downplay what influence social media has given us. Of course, for better or for worse. However, before we begin analyzing our very current situations, and before you ask this question of yourselves, let us look to our past, perhaps have a better understanding of our future. IBM. Cool. Nobody is shifting nervously and nobody's leaving. That's exciting. Okay, we're going on. So, IBM. A lot of these, let's say instances, you can explain away with saying, well, how could they have possibly known what they were going to do with it? And that's funny because that is exactly what IBM used as a defense when news of the business conduct it conducted with Nazi Germany in World War II hit the news. This is very condensed. I'm not going to go into all of the details about this, but I highly suggest y'all read the IBM and the Holocaust, the strategic alliance between Nazi Germany and America's most powerful corporation by Edwin Black. It is arguably the most well-researched book detailing IBM and its subsidiaries' involvement with Nazi Germany in the facilitation of genocide. It was the book that brought the severity of IBM's involvement to light in 2001, and with it, a new conversation about what roles and influences tech companies have in our society, for better or for worse. As Michelle Delio noted in her article, Did IBM Help Nazis in World War II? Yes, it did. For Wired magazine, IBM technology allowed Hitler's troops to achieve scale, velocity, and efficiency that would have been impossible without computerization. And when I saw that, it gave me chills, because isn't that something that we do right now with our applications to make sure that we have scale, velocity, and efficiency? Except for them, it was mass murder. And so what computerization, you ask? It's as simple as a punch card and the machine that goes with it. A punch card that tracked the ethnicity of Germans and made it much more efficient for the Nazis to carry out the extermination of Jews and others. So again, situational. As new scandals, and by scandals, let's just say that the public is becoming more aware and informed about what is happening behind closed doors at these tech companies. You cannot help but wonder where the company's ethics align with the shareholders' bottom line. We have donated much of our lives to either consume or be consumed by the products that these tech giants have created, and now more than ever, we should be realizing that they are touching every facet of our livelihoods and even now our democratic process. I would argue that as employees, we should be holding our companies and ourselves to higher standards. I understand the willfulness to slip away into retirement without making as much as a peep, because that is my default. However, if we're going to follow the principles of ethics that Weinstein laid out beautifully in my previous slide, it is when things start showing themselves as unfair, uncaring, and harmful, and it doesn't just have to be me or to me or any of the communities that I identified. And that's where empathy starts to come into play, and that's when I start my call to action. Okay, so here we have a timeline of 2019. Please ignore November and December. Obviously, those months have not happened yet, so I can't predict the future. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the situation that arose at tech companies and those that run said tech companies this year in 2019. Let me preface this by saying I will try to remain impartial. I'm really hard with that because my face tends to give what I'm thinking away, so just ignore my face. Specifically, I want to be completely transparent, girl develop it. I was personally involved in whatever, don't want to cuss, situation that was, so I cannot remain impartial for that. But again, I do feel as though all these situations are valid and should garner thought, and I will be happy to facilitate that for you. So, 2019, and I'm so happy that the Congress hearing happened in January so I could talk about Cambridge Analytica and everything. It's very exciting. So, Mark Zuckerberg testifies before Congress. What is he testifying in front of Congress for? Someone that has been living under a rock might ask, or somebody that just doesn't pay attention to tech news at all. He is testifying in front of Congress because of the Cambridge Analytica situation of 2018. And what happened in that situation? Cambridge Analytica, a company that was linked to Donald Trump's presidential campaign because Trump's campaign used the data for voter outreach, mishandled the data that Facebook was allowing the company to use. So, again, why is Mark Zuckerberg testifying before Congress? That seems like a Cambridge Analytica issue. Not really. Because of the ties to the Trump campaign, Facebook became entangled in the Russia investigation surrounding the 2016 election, and Cambridge Analytica gained access to private data of over more than 50 million Facebook users. We're moving on to March 2019, NPM, our favorite package manager. So, comes to a head with employees and continues a series of layoffs that they actually started mid-summer of 2018. I don't think a lot of people understand that. 3 of the 5 employees that happened to be fired for NPM, however, in March claim that they were fired because they were trying to unionize. Unionizing within tech is a topic that needs to be talked about right now, not just because about NPM allegedly firing these employees for trying to unionize, but we have seen the carnage of not having a union for tech workers firsthand, especially with game developers. And the most recent one that I want to talk about is Amazon, who laid off just in June 2019 dozens of developers, and dozens is what is used in their words, it's closer to 100, of developers for an Amazon Games organization, reorg. April 2019. Corinne Morehouse steps down as executive director of Girl Development amidst allegations of racial discrimination against employees at headquarters here in Philadelphia and also national chapter leaders. If any of you are not aware or familiar with the situation with Girl Development, in late 2018 of last year, news broke that there was racial discrimination happening at a chapter in Minneapolis against one who is now one of my friends, Lenny Sims. And then, further probing, it also turns out that it ran much deeper to discriminatory microaggressions and sometimes full-on aggressions, allegedly, being made toward the only black female employee that worked at headquarters at time, right here in Philadelphia. From that spurred a movement from the current chapter leaders calling for Girl Development to make it the major organizational changes to the board and for Morehouse to resign. Now, that was in October 2018, and it took her a few months to actually do that. Right, September 2019. Seth Vargo, a current engineer at Google Cloud and a former employee of Chef, calls out Chef and removes code from Chef's open source repo after he discovers that Chef had a $95,000 year-long contract with ICE. Something to note that before Chef eventually backtracked, with also a large outpouring of concern from current Chef employees about the contract. They also said that they were going to donate the full contract, the money that they made from the contract, to organizations, which is great. However, they did say that they were going to fulfill their current contractual obligations to ICE and CBP, but Chef also preferred to keep personal politics out of its business decisions. We'll touch back more on that later. I promise I have a whole slide. Okay, October 2019. So we're current now, and 2019 seems to be a really bad year for Mark Zuckerberg, and October seems to be a really bad month for Mark Zuckerberg. I think there's 4 things that he's been a part of. So anyway, let's get into it. At the beginning of the month, recordings from 2 July meetings of Zuckerberg addressing concerns with Facebook employees were leaked. In these meetings, he talks of Elizabeth Warren, unfavorably, a lot of people do, and addresses that if she were to win the Democratic nomination and go on to be voted in as President of the United States, Facebook would find themselves in a lawsuit with the United States government, but overall would see them coming out as victorious. Situation number 2. Elizabeth Warren decided to test the waters of Facebook's advertising policies and paid for an ad that falsely advertises Zuckerberg had endorsed Trump for re-election. The verbiage in the ad goes on to say that the claim was false, but the point absolutely had been made. A few days after Warren's ad, Zuckerberg gave a speech at Georgetown University where he defended Facebook's actions about having policies with policing speech on the platform. Embarrassingly, he quoted Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which is the only opinion I will give you about this speech, because whenever any cis white man that quotes Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is usually misquoting or selecting specific lines out of speeches in order to defend their apparent behavior, because what better way to pacify people than having one of Black America's heroes defend what you've done from the grave? Yeah, I know. As of yesterday, Mark Zuckerberg privately recommended that, oh my God, I'm going to mess up this name, Pete Buttigieg hires for Pete's presidential campaign, according to the article from Bloomberg written by Tyler Pager and Kurt Wagner. And I actually suggest you go read that article because it's not a lot of fluff. It's nothing but details about this space. Okay, I'll hurry up. And it shows that there's a lot of ties that these two have, including that Pete was actually one of the original first 300 users of Facebook, but apparently they're trying to make it like they weren't really friends, but then how was he one of the first original 300 people? Okay, moving on. Okay, so we're gonna go back to the moral spectrum for a temperature check. With us remembering the 5 principles of ethics for the sake of this talk: to do no harm, make things better, respecting others, to be fair and to care, apply them to the aforementioned scenarios and see where they fall on the morality spectrum for you. It's interesting because even with principles plainly laid out, the results are going to differ because the definition of these can be subjective to the individual. The majority of the situations I've presented you stem from companies wanting to remain apolitical, yet having a definitive role in politics at the same exact time. I say that you cannot do both. You have to have the business that You cannot have the business that you had, remain apolitical in the face of corruption and important policies, yet use your money and privilege to directly affect political standings. It just doesn't work both ways. Boop. Perfect. This is an expert that is pulled directly from Perry Chris' open letter that he posted to the Chef blog when things first came to a head with Chef's contract with ICE. Feel free to read the letter in its entirety. I pulled this entire paragraph out of the letter because I felt as though it was needed to be said, and I wanted to make an example out of this. Also, note that there are no ways bashing on Chef, and I'm not bashing on the CEO. I'm just pulling this out as an example of things not to do when things go wrong. So I'll read it. While I understand that many of you and many of our community members would prefer we had no business or relationship with DHS ICE, I have made a principled decision with the support of the Chef executive team to work with the institutions of our government, regardless of whether or not we personally agree with their various policies. I want to be clear that this decision is not about contract value. It is about maintaining a consistent and fair business approach in these volatile times. I would say that when people are deporting families and ripping children away from said families and then adopting them out into families where they do never see their real families ever again, that fairness with them is no longer an option. So let me do this so I can see perfect. So ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. This was said by Potter Stewart, who was an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court from 1958 to 1981, and also a judge that was a heavy advocate for civil rights. At some point, we need to step away from our keyboards and ask ourselves when it is enough. We as a collective cannot do the same when it comes to our industry. An industry where we dote ourselves on being so smart, so cunning, so able to problem solve and ship these solutions to the world, yet we cannot come together to figure out for ourselves, when is it enough? Indifference breeds stagnation, and that does nothing good for anyone, including yourselves. When do we stop sitting idly by? What is your call to action? Is it innocent people being put in cages, children being ripped away from their parents and being adopted right underneath their noses, children dying, people's data being mishandled and misused, active racial discrimination, or is that not relevant to you because it's not happening to you or anyone that you know? I'm not asking you to make a decision about your morality now, but you need to do it soon. I am asking you, however, to go throughout the rest of the conference and in between talks and sessions to think about it. We don't carry around a physical list of our code of ethics because we don't need to, but luckily I gave you a good list of principles as a starting point to help assess these situations. So start out with the things that you strongly morally oppose, or perhaps strongly morally are for, and start applying them to the situations that I've presented you today. You don't have to vocalize them or even tell me about them, but start filtering out the situational aspects of the spectrum and see where you will take a stand. Having a strong understanding of who we are as people is what is going to help us weather the storm that we are on the cusp of. Because the issues within our tech community are only going to get bigger from here, and sitting by and letting the newspapers report without any sort of real action will only get us by for so long. With great power comes great responsibility, and with great responsibility comes the hard reality that we're not just writing code and never were. We are no longer just hiding away behind our computer screen and making what the companies tell us to do. Now more than ever, we as employees of these companies have the voice and the power to spur real change, because hey, we are shareholders in these companies too, but beyond that, we are humans. We have emotions, hopes, and dreams, and we must realize that we are contributing to them, and we can make or break these things for other humans as well. So, what will it take for you to face the truth that a lot of the things that were being worked on by us right now are not necessarily ethical? I'm not calling anyone a bad person for working for a company that has done bad things, and I absolutely don't want this to be your takeaway. We work these jobs for money first and foremost, and unless we want to uproot ourselves and our families, sometimes the pickings are slim once we get to a certain level. However, we as technologists need to recognize what profound privilege that we do have in discourse that is happening surrounding our industry today. So I ask you, what is your code of ethics? When will you take a stand? Done. Thank you.